Then also let you see what that child's spelling is like when actually writing a story. So it's kind of neat to see. So the program that I'll be talking about is Words Their Way. And the reason why I like that program a lot, it's just so good. Instead of focusing on themes for teaching spelling, it's looking at spelling development, and it uses a developmental model. And what this model does is it uses a stage-based approach. So it talks about the first stage, the emergent stage. And then after children graduate from the emergent stage, they start spelling using letter name strategies. And we're going to talk about what that looks like. The next stage is the within word. I'm not telling you much about them because we'll be learning about them in a moment. The next stage is when they start using syllables and affixes in their spelling. And the last stage is mature spelling. And that would be the derivational spelling stages. So hopefully you're all in the derivational stage, the final stage. So here are some examples of children's spelling when they're in the emergent stage. This is what their writing is like. So what do you see? What does it look like to you? So an important part in learning to spell and learning to write is the whole idea of the mock writing. Ooh. So one of the things that you'll see actually is kids sort of scribbling and making those mock lines to represent writing. What do you see over here? Yeah, there are some numbers, some letters, and gibberish. Yeah, that they haven't learned the letters yet. They haven't learned the numbers yet. They treat them fairly similarly, and that they're still learning to form them. So they recognize that, wow, writing is something that's kind of special. There are these squiggles and these squaggles going on. And what you might actually see on their papers when they are drawing, and they'll have drawing and writing, is that if their writing is very squiggly like this, then you'll see that their drawings tend to be pretty linear looking. So they recognize this distinctness, that writing is something that's special. They don't know what the letters are yet, but they know that they look different than pictures. And this is a more mature child at the emergent spelling stage. What does it look like to you? Yeah, it's pretty random. They've got some numbers mixed in, they've got some letters. Child's using capitalized, lowercase, kind of mixed in together. You've got some reversals. Reversals are really common when kids are first learning the letters of the alphabet and learning the numbers. When kids are first introduced to this, before they're introduced to print, what's this? What's this? What's this? What's this? It doesn't matter the orientation. Any orientation I hold it, it's still a phone. But when they encounter print for the first time, what's this? What's this? So change in orientation. What's this? Mm-hmm. So when children encounter print, all of a sudden orientation becomes really important. And so when they make a lot of mistakes early on, not because they don't see the difference, but it's remembering which orientation goes with which shape. English is challenging visually, not as challenging as other languages, but one of the things that's challenging and confusing with English is that, especially the lowercase, a lot of the lowercase letters look similar to others, just changes in orientation. So in the emergent spelling stages, that's basically about ages birth to about 7, depends on where. And you basically see it for kids in preschool all the way till about the middle of first grade. Now what you'll see, because of the standards in public schools now, is that it might end around the middle of kindergarten when kids are being taught the letters. And when we look at reading development, it corresponds with emergent reading. So let's do a little bit of quick review now. Remember earlier we were talking about the stages of reading development? And we talked about the first stage, emergent reading. What was emergent reading like? It was stage 0 in Charles' model. So this is a little bit of review for next week. I try and loop back to the past to help you remember. So what was emergent reading like? Could they sound out words? No. So it's kind of like the pre-reading phase. They're becoming familiar with the idea of print. You'll see them pretend to read. How many of you have seen like preschoolers or kindergartners pretend to read a book? And they'll flip the pages, and some of them even memorize the entire book, like Goodnight Moon, popular book, pretty easy, or Brown Bear, What Do You See? Great thing about Brown Bear is that the pictures help them remember the entire text, so they just flip the page and it's like, okay, this is where it comes. So emergent spelling happens at the same time that kids are learning about print, starting to appreciate books, how they work. You'll find them, how many of you have seen like preschoolers or kindergartners starting to leave notes around for people? It's really sweet because they'll start like wanting to write notes for family members. I love you, mommy, like that kind of thing. You'll pick up the note and you have no idea what it says until they tell you what it says. But they start recognizing that there's something special about print. And in the emergent spelling stage, that's when they're learning that, wow, these squiggles on the page correspond to some sort of language, correspond to a message. So their spelling initially starts off being a whole bunch of random marks. Squiggles on the page that you saw. They start having some drawings. And just like that second example that we saw up top, their writing is made up of those mock letters. They look kind of like letters, or a combination of random letters and numbers, so that the letters don't correspond to the sounds yet. They just know if you put a stream of letters, it's going to spell something. Whether it does or not, that's another case. Okay, the first one is, I jumped out of the jet. I counted to 3. The next one is, I will miss you. Anyone want to guess what this says? Really? Don't want you to leave. I love you so much, but I hope you have a great time. I know, isn't that sweet? I wish I could say that I got that letter, but no, I didn't. But it's really sweet. Now, anyone know what's going on here with the don't? And there's no N there? The homoorganic rule, that basically the N is being nasalized and being absorbed by the vowel. So you see that it happens in real life with kids spelling. See, another bit of review slipped in here. So what happens is that the kids, and this is a child at the end of the letter name stage. And that happens when kids start receiving more formal schooling in their spelling. So people say it's kindergarten through early 3rd grade. might say it might be closer to second grade now with the changes in the standards. But it corresponds with beginning reading. So remember with beginning reading, kids are sounding out words. So what do they have to know in order to sound out words?
Letters.
Yep, they've got to know the letters.
And how you spell the letters.
So they need to know the letters and the sounds that go with the letters and how they go together. So they're learning the letter sound correspondences. And so with the reading, they're able to sound out words because they know that C-A-T goes k-a-t, cat. But when you see them trying to spell new words, what do you see them doing? How many of you have seen like a first grader or a second grader try and figure out how to spell a word? Yep, they sound it out. They try and stretch out the sound. Sometimes they get these distortions, and you see it. One of my favorite examples is a little Persian girl. This was about 10 years ago, and when you read her writing, you could totally hear her accent. She was writing about the Spice Girls. Oh gosh, so it was more than 10 years ago. Wow. So about 15 years ago, she was writing about the Spice Girls, and she wrote Spice, E-S-B-A-Y-S, so Espice. She was so cute. I love that little girl. She was very cute. Gosh, she's a teenager now. Now she's like 20. She's like your age. Oh my gosh. Okay, I just feel really old. Okay, so let's look at the spelling that they do. At the beginning of the stage, they might represent the only sounds that they can hear in the word. So have you seen any children's, like early kindergartners spelling where they'll use just one letter to represent a word? Okay, so an example that I've got, well, there you've got the M for the mine. But I've seen a child spell egg with the one sound that the child could hear when sounding it out. Good. So they might not fully represent all the letters or all the sounds in the word. They're representing all the sounds that they hear. So as the children become more phonologically aware, first they tend to represent the first sound. Then remember when we talked about development of phonological awareness, the initial sound and the final sound, the final consonant, are the two easiest sounds. First consonant's easiest, then comes the initial and the final, and then what comes at the end is the medial vowel. So what you see with the spelling is that you could be able to actually see what sounds the child can actually hear and represent, what their level of phonological awareness. Another example will be with drive. So what would it tell you if a child spells drive with a JN? Yep.
Isn't it like the rise coming out more nasally?
Well, what's happening is a J. What's happening there? Remember that rule? What happens with DRs like dragon or truck? We have affrication. Built-in review, looking at spelling. That's what I love. Okay, so what we see here is that a child hears the J in drive, and they're guessing on what comes next. So that sometimes you see in their spelling that they might only have one sound that accurately represents the sound. Here you see that the child for drive is able to represent the initial sound they hear and the final consonant. Remember how we talked about consonant clusters being harder than single consonants? And that what they hear first is the external one? So that if you have a consonant cluster like drive, the one that's more salient to the child in this case, is the one that's external to the vowel. So it would be the first sound that they can hear more easily. And then what comes later is being able to hear the internal consonant. So this would be a more advanced sign of phonological awareness. The child is able to hear and represent more sounds, being able to start hearing and representing the internal consonants. And here with drive, spelled with a DR, and the I, and the V. Again, that shows more accurate spelling. So within the letter name spelling stage, they're still trying to represent every single sound in the word, or trying to. So again, the examples is that they're representing the sounds that they hear. They may or may not represent the full word. Do you think it's easy to figure out what they're spelling? That it's easy to guess what they're writing when they're in the beginning spelling stage? It's kind of tricky because they might not be sufficiently phonologically aware to hear all the sounds in the word, to be able to identify all the sounds in the word. So the same thing with send. Which consonant are they hearing and representing? The internal or the external consonant? The external. So it's important to remember that the consonant that's external to the vowel is easier to represent and tends to develop for the internal. And if a child were to spell back, B-A-K, would you think that's a good spelling? It's a pretty good spelling. I mean, it gives you a pretty good guess of what the child's trying to spell. And they haven't learned the conventions, but they're still going by the letter names. They're still going by the letters and representing the sounds. Okay, let's look at the within word stage. Bank robbing. The people were at the bank. A robber stole $1 million. That night was a terrible night. The next night they caught the robber. They saw the license plate. He was in jail. In jail until he was an old man. What do you think of this spelling? What do you notice here? Not a big surprise, it's better. It's the next stage. But what do you notice with some of the spellings that you see here, the invented spellings? Mm-hmm.
Like they try to combine like two existing words into one, like at the and like life and date. Like it could be like listen and
Yeah, that's some of what the things that you see like in third grade is that the kids are still learning about spacing. This is on the verge of moving to cursive, and kids sometimes still need help with the spacing appropriately. In first grade, they might be reminded to put their finger down to have one finger space between words. I've seen first graders and second graders decide, no, I don't want to do the finger space. I'm going to put a vertical line between each word. Oh my gosh, it was such torture reading that child's writing because sometimes you didn't know, is this an L or the line? And it doesn't work well. Yeah.
They're still not able to distinguish like a letter to a sound with like the word until. Like you could pronounce until like as they spell it out, but you know that the U can create an in sound and the E can create the same sound as an I.
Right, so that with the vowels, particularly when there are unstressed syllables, those are really problematic for the kids, that they're not hearing them until they've got both vowels wrong. But you tend to find many, many more problems with unstressed syllables rather than the stressed syllables in this stage. What else do you notice? Uh-huh.
The word caught.
Uh-huh.
That's the correct way to spell caught, but it's not the right one in the sense in the context of what they're writing.
Yeah, that you see that some of the spelling mistakes they make are representations. They have a lot of problems with homonyms and homophones. So, especially homophones. Words that sound the same but are spelled differently. Yeah.
like using like past tense, like sold.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Like, you don't know if that was already, well, if it had already taken place, or if he's there now, or...
Yep. That doesn't tell you as much, but one of the things that I really like that you pointed out here was with Stold. Okay, granted that he overgeneralized or she overgeneralized, I don't know who wrote this, but the child overgeneralized in using the inflectional ending d for the sound. But is it spelled correctly? Is the inflection spelled correctly? No, so that the children are still learning to master the inflectional endings. So in general, you see that a lot of the spelling is much better. It's a lot more mature. All the sounds are represented, whether they're represented accurately or not. Mm-hmm.
Like even like before old man, like they put A instead of like N.
Yep.
So I guess they still don't understand that.
They have a hard time. Like in third grade, they're still learning. Let's see. The big difference between oral language and written language in third grade is that kids might not be consciously aware of which article they're using. And while they might in oral language use an and not realize it because they're using it so quickly, when it comes to writing, it requires them to be consciously aware of what they're writing and what they're putting down. And so you'll find them know the article, but then forget which variety to use. Another thing that you'll find at this age is that the use of apostrophes, particularly apostrophe S, oh my gosh, it's horrible. What you'll see in using the apostrophe S is that once they learn that it indicates possession, then sometimes they overgeneralize it and start using the apostrophe S for plural. And they'll show these regressions backwards. They get confused which situation to use the apostrophe S. So they're still learning the rules. They're still learning the conventions. So with the within word stage, you see it beginning for some children in first grade, some kids a little later. And it corresponds with transitional reading. So when we talk about transitional reading, we're talking also about confirmation and fluency. So what do you remember from confirmation and fluency from Jean Charles' model? That the early stage was when they're learning to sound out words, and confirmation and fluency, they're still learning to read, but what are they starting to do? After slowly sounding out words, what are they starting to build? How many of you have heard first graders read? What are one of the things, even if they're accurate, that you've noticed about their reading? I like to play.
Like they're trying to do it all in their head rather than doing it verbally.
Yep, they're doing it. Sometimes they have to verbally do it. Sometimes they do it all in their head. But what would you say about the pace? Does it sound, how does it compare to their speaking rates?
It's really choppy, and then sometimes they like stop in a word and they start sounding it out by letter.
Yeah, so that basically they're not fluent in the earlier stage, when they're just learning to read. And in confirmation and fluency, what you start having them do is strategies like repeated readings. They'll read the same passage multiple times, so that the first time they might be choppy, but how do they sound after the third time? A lot smoother. So by the end of, how many of you have heard a child at the end of third grade read? Or a fourth grader read? And you give them something that's at the right level, like you're not giving them adult level text, but they're reading National Geographic Kids, or they're reading a book that they got from Scholastic that's of their choosing. What do they sound like when they're in fourth grade? When they're in third grade and fourth grade? They're pretty fluent. So in confirmation and fluency, what happens is that they're no longer sounding out every single letter that they read. They start recognizing words automatically, so that the way that they represent written words and the relationship with print is no longer letter by letter. They're starting to use chunks of words. they also start having a sight word vocabulary. So the within word stage, what you saw in the letter name stage, you saw a lot of spelling mistakes that looked like they were struggling to sound out every single sound in a word. The within word stage, you saw that their spelling was much more conventional and that they had problems with unstressed vowels, learning the conventional rules. So for example, the word seat, they may spell it with a double E. They may spell it with the final E. But what does it show you if they spell seat with the double E or the final E? What does it show you about their knowledge of spelling rules? If a child were to spell seat like this with the double E, pardon me? They're spelling it out more, and they also understand to have the long E sound, well, the tense E sound, is that the conventional way for spelling it might be a double E, or it might be E with the silent E at the end of the word. So they're learning the rules, they're learning the conventions. So if a child spelled nail with A-L-E, what would it tell you? Yep, that they know the pattern. So rope, they might spell rope, O-A, instead of O with the final E. It's another vowel team. It's another conventional vowel team, but they're starting to recognize the patterns that happen within words. So that the spelling errors that they make aren't so out there. So they might even make things more difficult by looking at a more challenging rule, like with cry. Or found, spelling it with a W instead of a U. And here, when you see the child spelling troop with the O-P-E, it's again recognizing that, well, we know that it's not a single vowel by itself. And sometimes the final E changes the pronunciation, not in giving the tense pronunciation, but also giving a different pronunciation altogether. Like the word D-O-N-E. What's the pronunciation for that? Is it done? Done. So there's the recognition that, well, maybe this is one of the exceptions with the final E, that the final E changes the pronunciation of the vowel. And sometimes the children, they'll recognize that you don't have a K as the final letter by itself. And so they might add an E instead of the C, the CK, because they forget which pattern to use. But they know that in English words, with English spelling, you very rarely have B-A-K. You don't have a word that ends with just a K. What's the pattern that we often see? K-E, or what else? C-K. All right. Awesome. Okay. As you can see, as they get older, the texts get a little longer. And this is from a 5th grade child. And all the kids were asked to write about an invented animal, to make up an animal and describe it. So my animal is an extraordinary creature that lives in valley forests. This animal has Bowser's shell, like in video games, but a monkey's wearing it that's fur is spiky like a porcupine. It has some cool exotic colors like brown, yellow, green, orange, and red. Its shell feels like a webbing from a duck's foot, but hard like a turtle's shell. Ouch! Its spikes are razor sharp, and I'm afraid of petting its fur. This creature is as strong as an emerald. It is also predator to reptiles, except for turtles. It eats fruits, vegetables, and reptiles, and it's a mild, gentle creature that behaves very well with its own kind and humans. It has 26 one-inch teeth and always have food fights with their family. It hears just as well as a rabbit and sounds like a chimpanzee. It is a nocturnal animal. It does not like the light at all. It is as tall as crocodile's length and is as wide as one of the redwood trees. So what do you notice with its spelling? You can tell that the content is a lot more mature than before. But what do you notice with the spelling? Yeah.
Like they're missing a lot of areas or words where they could have apostrophes in them.
Yeah, that what you find is that with the apostrophe S, the inflection marking possession, that's problematic for the child. Yeah.
There are a couple words where they words that have like double letters.
Uh-huh.
They're missing like the second letter.
Yeah, so for example, there was petting there that was spelled, I think, with a webbing over here. Instead of it being double B, it only has a single B. And there was another example there. Petting, yeah. Petting spelled like peating. Uh-huh.
Like how old is this child?
5th grade. Mm-hmm. So you see that there is a developmental trend to it as well. Also, so what we see is that the writing is more mature, but that the reason why it's called syllables and affixes this stage, it's also been called syllables and junctures, is that it's with the syllables and rules with syllables in combination that are problematic. So you start seeing this as early as about 8-year-olds. So the more advanced spellers in 3rd grade, beginning 4th grade. So you start through about 8th grade. And it corresponds with intermediate reading. Now, when we talk about intermediate reading, we're talking about kids now who are already fluent in their reading. They're now in the stage of reading to learn. So they're starting to read texts to gain more information. By the end of the intermediate reading stage, their reading comprehension tends to be as strong as their listening comprehension. They start off with weaker reading comprehension than listening comprehension, but by the end of the intermediate reading stage, they can have reading comprehension that matches their listening comprehension. And some of the issues that comes up is with knowing when to double the letter when they add inflectional endings. So remember when we talked about the different syllable types? Opened, closed, the LE? Let's look at hop. Is that an open or closed syllable? It's closed. So with the closed syllables, what happens is that there's a consonant or consonant cluster that comes right after the vowel, and it kind of closes off the vowel. So that's why they're called closed. But what happens is that when you add the ing, what happens is that, so the ing inflection, it kind of pulls the p away, the p from the syllable, the initial syllable. So you end up with ho. So what happens when the p is removed from the hop? What are you left with? Ho. That's why hoping. So what happens is, does it remain closed or does it open up? Right, so that by adding the ing to a closed syllable, if there's a single consonant there, it tends to open up. And that's why we double the consonant, so that it keeps it closed. That's why coping is C-O-P-I-N-G. How would you spell coping? Right. So the reason why we introduced the double letter is to keep it a closed syllable. Of course, you'd never hear teachers explaining this to the kids and say, oh, well, we don't want to open up the syllable. That's a little more information, but through the patterns that they see. And so by doing word sorts and the patterns, children would be able to learn this. So that's a big issue in syllables and affixes. Similarly, doubling, another issue with multisyllabic words. What do you see here with confusion?
They have a double letter word where it's not applied.
And what do you also notice here?
Spelled shun, like actual shun.
Right. So that they spell the shun like the word shun. I shun you. Instead of the morpheme. So they're still learning structural analysis. Similarly, learning the ending, the as in capture. So they're representing all the sounds, but they start in the syllable and affixes. They're starting to learn the syllables and the affixes, the suffixes. So, again, with pleasure, it's a pretty good guess in how to spell it, but it's not reflecting the stem. Please. Now, I didn't include a writing sample from the derivational stage. You could use your own writing as examples. I'm going to assume that mature writing. So it starts being mastered between grades 5 and 12, and it's connected with advanced reading. So with advanced reading, what you'll find is, again, in the reading to learn, from multiple perspectives. From 2 perspectives to multiple perspectives. So things that you're asked to do here: integrate ideas from multiple sources. In high school, kids are starting to be asked to write papers that they have to integrate different viewpoints. That would be advanced reading. And what's happening here is they're learning the spelling. They're learning now some of the derivational suffixes from the Latin roots, the Latin layer. And they're also learning the Greek layer, learning to use it. So learning words like opposition, criticize, benefit, amusement.
I'm just wondering, with the syllables affixes, the age range was between like 8 and 18. So does that mean like there are some cases where a child doesn't master that until they're like 15 or 16?
Yeah.
And then that's when they move into the derivational stage?
Yeah, that it basically is one of the things that the Words Their Way program, if you ever become like a reading teacher or elementary school teacher, middle school, high school teacher, what I really love about that program is that it takes a developmental approach and says that you've got to master these skills before you're really able to master the next skills. And that it doesn't necessarily correspond neatly with chronological age. So most kids who are 10 and older, they might be dealing with syllables and affixes, or they might be working on this. You don't get many kindergartners or first graders or second graders dealing with this. Yeah?
So with the situation Anthony was talking about, say a student doesn't get to master a type of understanding before they hit a certain grade level, and with the standards increasing every year, how do teachers measure that? How do students make sure that they're not falling behind?
Well, that's a great point. One of the things that you find is a lot of the spelling patterns that you see in state-adopted curricula follow these stages or are similar to these stages and follow these sorts of needs with development. The interventions that, the intervention programs that are state-adopted, also with the spelling, they kind of adapt this sort of look at what stage a child is at and then progress from there. And I actually have for you, as soon as we finish talking about the derivational stage, I've got for you a child's spelling dictation. And Words Their Way has a number of spelling inventories. There is the primary school spelling inventory, the elementary school spelling inventory, the upper elementary spelling inventory. And I know I'm talking a lot about Words Their Way because I think it's a really fabulous program. There are a lot of other great programs out there as well, but I'm just using this as an example. I'd rather introduce you to one that I think is really good rather than incompletely teach you about a whole bunch of different things. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at a child's performance on the spelling test that comes with it, and I'll be showing you how to analyze it together, looking at the different features, so that what I also like about that spelling program, and you see with other spelling programs as well, that based on a child's performance on the placement test, you can actually figure out what level to start the child at, and they often come with spreadsheets for the classroom so that you could group kids based on the different stages that they're at, and they say, okay, with the curriculum you should start about here. With the curriculum you should start about there. So for some of the spelling programs that are out there, they're really terrific. And you see that spelling tends to progress, spelling instruction, along these lines to help kids. But the interventions also kind of step back and it's like, hey, what stage are you at? Let's work from there. Does that help? Kind of? Okay. Okay. So this is the feature chart. And I've got the spelling of a child for you. And I'm going to let you, what I've got are photocopies of a child's performance on the spelling test, as well as the feature chart. And so that I'm going to give you some time. I'll go through the first couple examples with you, and then give you a chance to sort of go through the feature chart and the child's spelling and get a sense of where you think the child might be. So I think that we could turn off the video camera, pause it for a little bit, and then we'll come back to this in a little while. Since it just means so much more when you could actually do it. So one of the things that you see in all the preschools, well, in high quality preschools, is that you see the teachers with the books. How many of you have seen the read-alouds in the classes? The teacher holds the book, and it's a big book, and the teacher reads and points to every word as the teacher reads. That's one way of helping kids start noticing the print, start noticing the connection between speech and print. For the kids who are developing some basic literacy skills already, then they might be able to read along and guess words. But it helps them with that sort of awareness. Another issue that's really important is building vocabulary with concept sorts. And what you would do in a concept sort is that you would have a bunch of pictures because they can't read them yet. So you would have a whole bunch of pictures and you would have them sort them into different groups based on different ideas. So an example that you could use with a nutritional theme is that you could have different foods that they can sort into fruits and vegetables and grains and proteins and dairy. So you could work with the different food groups that way. So that children in preschool, they like sorting things. They like organizing things. You can give preschool children a box filled with little farm animals, little plastic ones, some big, some small, different colors, so that you would have like the cows and the ducks and the sheep and the dogs and the chickens, and they would be different colored. And you'd be amazed at how many different ways kids would sort those little plastic toys. It's a great thing for kids to have in preschools. Gosh, it sounds like my early childhood ed class. But it's a way of building vocabulary with the concept sorts. Another thing that you'd see in preschools and kindergartens is doing those picture sorts, But instead of having them based on concepts, you start off with concepts so they get the idea of sorting, but then you move to picture sorts based on phonology. So let's put all the pictures that start with the S sound in this pile. And let's put all the P pictures in that pile. So here is a ping pong ball. Does it go with the S pile or does it go in the P pile? The P pile. And here's Sammy the snake. Where does Sammy the snake go? With the S pile or the P pile? S, right. So I know with adults it seems like, oh, come on. But for preschoolers, with kindergartners, this is a really valuable skill. They enjoy sorting at that age. And it's a great way for them to start, once they understand the idea of putting them in specific categories, doing it based on sounds helps them build that awareness. And then playing with songs with the rhymes and the different sounds. And there are all kinds of alphabet sort of games that kids can play, that you could even make up. So in preschool, kids can start playing simple games like Candyland. You can change the Candyland game. I've seen teachers change it so that they'll have different letters. And so instead of it being for the different letters of the alphabet. And so what they would do is instead of moving to the color, they would move to the letter. Neat little trick, huh? And so it's just a letter matching activity. They don't have to name the sounds. When they get a little more skilled with recognizing the letters and identifying and matching them, then they could say, okay, but to move it, you have to give me the letter name, or what sound does a letter make? So you can make it more difficult for the kids as they master the visual matching. So those are some of the things that you can do in preschool and kindergarten, and do at home with your kids when you have kids, to help build this emergent literacy sort of skill. And it doesn't have to be with English. Do it in the home language. Okay, for the letter name stage. The key goal is to help kids represent all the sounds in a word. So you'll remember that early in the stage, kids might be spelling words like mine with just the letter M. And then as they get more skilled, they might represent the sounds and N in mine with the M and the N. And then later on, they might spell mine M-A-Y-N. But that's still pretty good because they're representing the initial consonant, the final consonant, and the vowel. So that's the goal of the letter name stage, for them to hear all the sounds, identify all the sounds, and be able to represent them with a letter. So one of the things that you start seeing teachers use are picture sorts to sort them based on the initial letter or the final letter. You also see it graduating towards using word sorts, so they see the actual words. How many of you have heard the alphabet rap that's sometimes used to teach kids? A says ah, A says ah, apple, apple, ah, 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 B says buh, B says buh, banana, banana, buh, buh, buh. Okay, I'm so lame, but my daughter tells me that, I already know that. But I mean, songs and chants and raps, I'm just the wrong generation. But those are things that engage kids, that they're fun mnemonic tools that help them learn the sounds. And so again, it's a great way of teaching. How many of you have seen in kindergarten and first grade classrooms those letter charts that you see on the wall? And that you often see like the letters with a picture. So a big picture of an apple with the A, and a banana with B, and a cat with C, so that they have a picture that represents a word that starts with the initial sound or the most common pronunciation of that letter. That's another thing that helps kids learn the letter sound correspondences and helps remind them what the sounds are. The worst letter chart that I saw for K, it had a picture of a billy goat knocking the door, and it had those like red sort of stars coming out as it was like bashing into the door, and the word was knock. And I'm thinking, okay, So you're picking an example where the K is silent in the initial position, and the picture doesn't look like knocking. So 2 strikes for that one. Another thing that also happens in first grade and kindergarten in teaching this is also starting to build sight word vocabularies with word banks. So kids start learning the high frequency words like up, or the, or on, or the. Another thing that you could start doing is playing like memory games with the kids. So how many of you have played memory where you've got all the cards facing down and you've got to find a match? And so you don't have to do it with like 52 cards. You could start doing it with even 6 cards or 8 cards, so that the emphasis isn't so heavily on the memory part, but it's on, you flip over a card and half the cards have pictures and half the cards have words that correspond to the pictures. And they have to match the pictures with the words. And one of the things that I've seen teachers do to make it easier for kids is that all the pictures were red on the back and all the words were yellow on the back, so that they knew that they had to turn one yellow and one red over, so that way they weren't coming up with 2 words at the same time. They'd also help the kids every time they flipped them over, make sure that they pronounce those words. So that's another thing that they do. Another thing is using those sorts to contrast the consonant blends. So cat, cast, cat, can't. So again, having children listen to words that have the blends and compare them to the ones without the consonant clusters. That helps them start listening to the internal consonant, the consonant that's closer to the vowel. Another thing that you'll see is the compare and the contrast the lax vowel families. So how many of you have seen those word sorts with like the cat, like you have a bunch of words, some of them with the A, some of them with the O. So cat, hat, can, cab, and then you have cob, cot, as in the thing you sleep on, top. And kids have to sort the words, and then they have to read the words after they've sorted them. Those are, again, things that help kids hear the difference between the different lax vowels and start seeing the different word patterns and being able to see the spelling patterns. But a big thing that you see a lot of in the primary grades are the word families. The at family, the bat, cat, hat, bat, sat, fat, mat, splat. So one of the goals with this is to help kids be able to see the letter-sound relationships. And the within word is basically, the goal is, now that you can represent all the sounds, now that you can give a good guess for most of the words, that people can kind of figure out what you're spelling, now the goal is to learn the conventional spellings for the monosyllabic words. So now what starts happening is the sorts to contrast the lax versus the tense vowels. Looking, for example, with the tense vowel patterns. So the OA for the soap and the boat and the coat versus the OPE, cope, hope, slope, mope. And what you start seeing is that words start being sorted based on semantic features or grammatical features. So putting all the verbs together. Kids are being taught subject and predicate in schools now. So they know different kinds of words. They start learning about adjectives and adverbs and nouns. They're learning to contrast the different R-controlled vowels. And playing card games using homophones. So play Go Fish. So I've got deed No, that's, gosh, no. Why is it caught and caught? There you go. Here and here. Another homophone. I've got here. Anyone have any heres? Fish. Fish my wish. So playing with the cards with that. With the syllables and affixes, that's when kids are using word hunts to look for the doubles. That's when they're doing things to focus on the suffixes. Another thing that also happens is that comparing open and closed syllables. Again, you don't have to use the words with the kid saying, this is an open syllable, this is a closed syllable. But you can point out when there's the ing ending and there's just one consonant in between the vowel. It's like, okay, you have C-O-P-I-N-G. Do you think it's going to be a long sound, the tense sound, or do you think it's going to be the short sound? They can't figure out that the double consonant, when it's followed by an inflectional ending, like ing or ed, can help keep it with the lax pronunciation. So they can figure out that sort of rule of thumb. Another important thing is looking at where you put the stress for homographs. Comparing words that end with the ul sound, like little, able, and the sound, like bird and word and heard. Teaching common prefixes, and one of the things that you start seeing a lot more of is that the spelling now isn't taught in isolation. In learning about the syllables and the affixes, what you start doing is connecting it with word meaning. How do you figure out the meaning of these words? So with the re, using that prefix re, what does the prefix re mean? When you repay, redo. So this way, what you're doing is you're teaching the meaning of the prefix to help with the spelling. What we'll do is that we'll just quickly go through the derivational stage. We've got 2 minutes left, and then that way on Tuesday's class, I'm going to be posting by Friday morning. I'm going to post a sort of a study guide for you, a single word document of here are the things that you should know. Next Tuesday is going to be a review session, but it's going to be set up in a way that here's what you need to know. Anyone have questions about this? Let's go through your questions. So with the derivational stage, then what you're focusing on is now learning the derivational suffixes for multisyllabic words, focusing on the Latin layer and the Greek layer. And so again, the emphasis of instruction is looking at the connections between the spelling and the meanings. How is nation related to national? Even though the pronunciation of the A differs, you've still got the same stem. So there's heavy duty emphasis on looking at syllables, prefixes, stems, and noting the derivations and the bases and the roots. What you might also start doing is in the content areas, because again, this is something that comes in middle school, upper elementary, middle school, is that you're looking in the content areas, these unique spellings. So when people talk about photosynthesis, how many of you remember in school your teacher talked about what photo means? What does photo mean? And what does synthesis mean? Making, so that it helps you remember that photosynthesis means making energy from light. Another thing also is using root books and dictionaries. And the International Reading Teachers, the International Reading Association has the Reading Teachers Book of lists. And it has great lists of roots, of bases, of suffixes, of different forms, so that you could help kids combine and create new words as well. So have a great weekend. I'll post for you by Friday morning what you need to know for the midterm.